Imagine waking up, checking your bank account, and seeing $10 million. You're rich. You're set. You're going to buy a house, a car, maybe a boat. Then you go to the grocery store, and that $10 million buys you 3 eggs. Let's rewind. Zimbabwe, 1980. Fresh independence. Full of hope, full of resources, full of potential. The country had some of the most fertile farmland in all of Africa. So fertile, in fact, that Zimbabwe was called the breadbasket of Africa, feeding not just its own people, but exporting food across the entire continent. The economy wasn't perfect, but it worked. The Zimbabwean dollar? Stronger than the US dollar at one point. One Zimbabwean dollar could buy more than one American dollar. Let that sink in. This is important. Because what happens next isn't a story about a poor country getting poorer. It's a story about a functional country being driven, deliberately, recklessly, almost impressively, off a cliff. And at the wheel, one man, Robert Mugabe. Here's where it starts. The 1990s. Zimbabwe had a problem that a lot of post-colonial African countries had. The land. Specifically, who owned it. Most of the best farmland was still in the hands of white Zimbabwean farmers, descendants of colonial-era settlers. Black Zimbabweans, the majority of the population, owned very little of it. Legitimate grievance, real injustice. Nobody's arguing that. But Mugabe's solution? A masterclass in how to fix one problem by creating 10 worse ones. Starting around 2000, the government launched what they called the Fast Track Land Reform Program. Sounds official. Sounds planned. What it actually was? Armed militias showing up at farms, telling white farmers to leave, sometimes violently, handing the land over to Mugabe's political allies, most of whom had zero farming experience. Zero. A farm that used to produce 10,000 tons of corn per year now produced nothing. Because the new farmer was a retired army general who'd never planted a seed in his life. I've never done this before. You'll figure it out. I don't even know what season it is. You'll figure it out. He did not figure it out. Multiply this across hundreds of farms, then thousands. Agricultural output collapsed. Exports evaporated. Food shortages began. And the foreign currency that Zimbabwe earned from selling crops? Gone. But here's where the story shifts from tragedy to something almost darkly comedic. The government needed money. They always do. But now Zimbabwe had no exports, dwindling tax revenue, and a pile of debts, including payments to veterans of the Independence War who were getting increasingly angry. What did Mugabe do? He told the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to print more money. Not metaphorically, literally. Print more money. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler: everything. Okay, quick detour. Stay with me. Imagine money is pizza. There are 10 slices of pizza, and 10 people. Everyone gets 1 slice. Fair. Now the government prints more money, but they don't make more pizza. They just give everyone 10 slices of paper and say this is worth 1 slice of pizza. But there's still only 10 slices of pizza. So now each paper slice is worth not a full slice anymore. Maybe half. Maybe a quarter. That's inflation. Normal inflation. Annoying but manageable. Hyperinflation is when the government keeps printing and printing and printing until the paper itself is worth more as toilet paper than as currency. That's not a joke. We'll get back to that. Inflation in Zimbabwe hits 112%. Bad. Very bad. 200%. 600%. At this point, normal economic logic is breaking down. People start doing something economists call dollarization. They stop trusting the Zimbabwean dollar and start doing transactions in US dollars, South African rand, anything that holds value. The government's response? Make that illegal. Because clearly, the problem was that people didn't trust the currency enough, not that the currency was worthless. Inflation crosses 66,000%. Read that again. 66,000%. A loaf of bread that cost $1 in 2000 now costs, well, you'd need a calculator. And the calculator would need more digits. The Reserve Bank tried everything. They slashed zeros off the currency, a process called redenomination. They printed a $10 million bill, then a $100 million bill, then a $100 billion bill, then a $100 trillion bill. The $100 trillion bill. The single largest denomination banknote in the history of human civilization. Printed, distributed, and worth, at the time of printing, approximately $30 US. $30. A note with 14 zeros on it, worth less than a nice lunch. November 2008. This is the moment. This is when Zimbabwe enters the record books in the worst possible way. Inflation reaches, and economists still argue about the exact peak because their instruments weren't designed to measure this, an estimated 89.7 sextillion% per month. Per month. That's 89 quintillion 700 quadrillion%. To put that in human terms, prices were doubling every 24 hours, sometimes faster. You go to the market in the morning. A loaf of bread costs $100,000. You go back at 5 p.m., same loaf, $200,000. Salaries became meaningless. Workers demanded to be paid daily, sometimes twice daily, because the money lost value faster than they could spend it. I need my salary in the morning. We pay on Fridays. It's Monday. By Friday, I can't buy a bus ticket with it. Fair point. The central bank's solution? Keep printing. Bigger numbers. More zeros. At one point, the government was spending 60% of its budget just on printing money. To print money that was immediately worthless. It cost more to print the bill than the bill was worth. Banks ran out of cash. ATMs dispensed stacks of notes that couldn't buy a single tomato. People started using banknotes as wallpaper. Literally, because it was cheaper than buying actual wallpaper. And those $100 trillion bills? People bought them as souvenirs, more valuable as a curiosity than as currency. $100 trillion. Gone. Here's what the numbers don't tell you. Imagine you worked your entire life, saved carefully, put money in the bank every month for 40 years. Retirement coming. You're ready. Then one year, your life savings, enough to live comfortably for a decade, isn't enough to buy a week's groceries. That happened to real people, to teachers, nurses, civil servants, farmers. An entire generation's savings vaporized. The healthcare system collapsed. Hospitals ran out of medicine because medicine had to be imported, and Zimbabwe had no foreign currency left to buy it. Doctors were paid in Zimbabwean dollars that became worthless before they could use them. Most simply left the country. 80% of Zimbabweans were unemployed. 80%. Cholera broke out in 2008. In a country that once had functioning infrastructure, thousands died. Children stopped going to school, not because there were no schools, but because teachers had fled, or stopped showing up because there was no point. Teaching a class for a monthly salary that couldn't buy a single egg. Not a metaphor. An egg. The middle class, the doctors, engineers, accountants, educators that every functioning economy is built on, packed their bags and left. Zimbabwe lost an estimated 25% of its population to emigration between 2000 and 2010. A quarter of the country. Just left. The ones who stayed developed something called survival economics. Barter systems. Trading goods directly, eggs for flour, labor for food. The informal economy became the real economy, because the formal one had ceased to exist. The government finally did what it should have done years earlier. They abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar entirely, officially, legally, gone. Replaced by a multi-currency system, US dollars, South African rand, Botswana pula. Regular foreign currencies, currencies backed by actual functioning economies. And it worked, immediately. Inflation stopped overnight, not gradually, overnight, because there was no Zimbabwean dollar left to inflate. Shops refilled. goods appeared. The economy, battered, hollowed out, traumatized, started to breathe again. But here's the thing nobody tells you about recovery. The stores came back, the food came back, but the people who left didn't come back. The savings that were destroyed didn't come back. The hospitals that collapsed, the schools that emptied, the trust in institutions that was shattered. That takes not years, but decades. Zimbabwe formally demonetized the old currency in 2015. If you had any Zimbabwean dollars sitting in a bank account, the government offered to exchange them. The rate? 35 quadrillion old Zimbabwean dollars to $1 US. 35 trillion to 1. If you had 35 quadrillion dollars in the bank, a sum that would have made you incomprehensibly wealthy in any normal country, you got $1 American dollar. 1. There's a lesson here that goes beyond economics. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation wasn't caused by bad luck, drought, or some mysterious market force nobody could predict. It was caused by choices. By a government that valued political power over economic reality. By institutions that were systematically dismantled until they served one man instead of one nation. By the slow, deliberate replacement of competence with loyalty. The printing press didn't cause the collapse. The collapse caused the printing press. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand. Hyperinflation is never really about money. It's about trust. The moment people stop believing a piece of paper has value, it doesn't. Money is a collective hallucination, the most powerful shared fiction humanity has ever invented. When the government broke that trust, the fiction ended, and 14 million people woke up from the dream, with nothing in their hands but numbers on worthless paper. A government that robs Peter to pay Paul can always depend on the support of Paul. The problem is when it runs out of Peter.